Hello and a very warm welcome to an India Today special broadcast that comes to you from the strife-torn Ukrainian capital Kyiv. I'm Gaurav Sawant. Over the course of the next 1 hour, we will get you ground realities and the fear of an imminent Russian strike at Kyiv. There have been a series of missile and artillery attacks on Kyiv. But first up, the ground realities.
Kyiv under siege. Ukrainian capital up in smoke. India Today, the last team standing. Minutes after a missile strike.
You can hear more blasts that are taking place.
Meters from the site of attack.
We are being told to leave this area because it's not safe.
Fearless view of war zone Ukraine.
Thick plumes of smoke rising from a building here in Ukrainian capital Kyiv.
When we say up close, we mean up close.
The missiles and rockets are hitting Kyiv with deadly accuracy. It's almost with pinpoint precision that they're targeting vital assets and vital points. Earlier today, India Today's camera person Pawan Kumar and I were at one such strike. The missile struck a building. There was a huge fire, plumes of smoke. It is being said that this was an air defense site taken out by the Russians. There were several offices in this area. We are told that there was no loss of life, but massive damage to property. We bring you this India Today exclusive ground report.
The sound of explosions, plumes of smoke spiraling into the sky, dust rising from a damaged building. This is the new normal in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. While a huge armed convoy heads to Ukraine's capital, Putin's forces have been relentlessly assaulting the city with fire. On Friday, the India Today team witnessed intense shelling from up close.
Thick plumes of smoke rising from a building here in Ukrainian capital Kyiv, not far from an airfield here. It is being said that there was not just an air defense system, but also certain other offices. And you can hear more blasts that are taking place.
The target was this factory that the Russians believed was storing arms. As the factory went up in flames and mangled metal, our team was asked to leave for a safer zone.
We are moving away from this area. We are being told to leave this area because it's not safe to be here. You can hear some blasts that are taking place in this area. There was still some time back, there was some kind of sound. There was some kinds of sound where people were being asked to move away from this locality.
But there's hardly a place in Kyiv today which can be considered safe.
Many trees have been cut off here. Many trees cut off and put on the road. Many roadblocks set up. This is that road that comes from the north, that 63-kilometer long cavalcade or the Russian convoy that we are talking about. This is the road that convoy is meant to take, and that is why multiple roadblocks and checkpoints are being set up here and barriers being set so that it's not an easy ride for that huge convoy that's coming in. This locality has been asked to move to a safer location. Imagine asking thousands of people to move out of here and move to a safer location, because this could well be a scene of a fierce battle between Russia and Ukraine.
Checkpoints, roadblocks dot the capital. Kyiv is a city expecting a full assault anytime soon.
We've just been told to get out of here because there is another missile fire or a rocket fire that is expected in this area. That facility was struck. Apparently it was struck because there was an air defense facility there not far from the airfield. The attempt perhaps was to take out that airfield and the air defense facility before this imminent attack, and that is why we've been told to to get out of there, because more attacks are anticipated. The air raid siren and information that is coming in seems to indicate that more attacks could take place, and that is why we are coming out of this area in Kyiv. This entire place has been sealed off. Some of these localities are actually being asked, residents are being asked to move to safer location in view of an imminent air to ground or a missile strike that's taking place. Kuldeep ji,
wait, just camera.
okay, we're getting the camera down for a moment, Shiv, because this is a military checkpoint. This is the road to the north. We are just trying to negotiate. Give us a moment.
As we drove through Kyiv, more blasts from Russian missiles were heard.
Tense here in this part of Kyiv, that northern route. We were trying to figure out why was the progress so slow, what is the situation on ground, and just when we were traveling on that road, there was a massive explosion, there was a strike, whether it was a rocket strike or a missile strike, we do not know, at an air defense facility. And that's another strike. That's another blast. That's another massive blast that's just happened barely a few, maybe kilometers away from us. We can hear it.
There's brave resistance in Kyiv, but it's also a city on edge and on its knees.
मैं आज तक इतना नहीं डरा हूँ जितना अब मुझे डर लगा, क्योंकि हमारे होते होते वहाँ पर 2 बम और गिरे हैं,
2 धमाके और
हुए, और 1 किलोमीटर की रेंज में.
Fuel is running out, and so is food.
This is the area that's likely to be targeted very extensively. An imminent attack on this place, and yet long queues for fuel. People want to stock up, fuel up, and get out of here. People here are being told, remain indoors. You are safest only indoors and not outside on the street. But life in Kyiv is such that people are venturing out, if at all, it's only to buy food and to buy medicines, and for no other reason. Money is not available, exchange not available, food and water shortage at this point of time. So the situation appears to be taking a turn for the worst.
The Russians are closing in on Kyiv, preparing for what could be a final attack on the city.
Earlier, blasts were heard at a distance. Now these blasts are much closer, they are more frequent, and they are bigger, they're deadlier than the ones that we were hearing in the past days. It was almost as if earlier the Russian artillery or the Russian missile systems, they were zeroing in on the target, but now they're hitting with deadly precision.
A 64-kilometer-long Russian convoy of tanks, armored vehicles and supply trucks is readying for a big thrust to gain control of the capital. Kyiv is the trophy that Putin wants and needs to dominate Ukraine and impose his will. With Gaurav Sawant from Ground Zero Kyiv, Ukraine, Bureau Report, India Today.
Out of the Ukrainian strife-torn capital Kyiv is a battle in itself, as information technology and Ukrainian language student Harjot Singh found out. He was on his way out of Kyiv when at a checkpoint he came under heavy fire. He's received 3 bullet injuries. He was almost left for dead. Fortunately, he survived. He was taken to hospital. I caught up with him at the Kyiv hospital, and he is now desperate to get back to India. Unfortunately, he's lost his passport, he's lost his documents, he's lost everything, and he wants the government to help him.
We are currently at the Kyiv hospital. There is shelling going on outside, and with me is Harjot Singh, an Indian student studying information technology here in Kyiv, and he was injured in firing. Harjot, how are you right now?
I'm good, sir. I'm now feeling much better.
You're much better right now?
Yes.
What happened? You have a fracture in your foot and you're injured near the chest. What happened?
So the story was like 27th of last month. I was going to Vokzalna for metro Kyiv to Lviv. But there, unfortunately, I can't board any train. I tried 3 to 4 times and I failed. So then I was decided to go Lviv by taxi. Then we get a white color Sonata, and we are 3 people in that car, and we are moving to Lviv.
Were the others with you also Indians? The other three?
No, they are the
people?
different people. They belong to different.
So you were traveling alone?
Alone. I'm only one Indian in that car.
Okay. Then?
So then after that we crossed the 3 borders, and after that the third border security, they inform us to, sir, instead of going today, try next morning, because now is not safe.
So you crossed 3 checkpoints?
Yes.
You were outside Kyiv and you were turned back?
Turn back.
Then what happened?
When we came back to Kyiv city, and suddenly I noticed that someone fired on our car and shoot it, and one bullet I saw in front of my eyes. They crossed just in front of my car from my head.
Okay.
And I was sitting on the back side of car, left hand side, and after that we just all fold our bodies and get down, lay down on the carpet.
Others also injured?
Yes, everyone. Everyone was injured. One bullet, my hand was like this, and one bullet just insert from my hand and goes to my chest. Inside my chest.
So you're very lucky to be alive. You're very, very lucky to be alive.
Yes, sir. It's my new life. I can say that it's new life. The last one, Harjot, is dead. It's new Harjot.
The once bustling Ukrainian capital Kyiv now resembles a ghost city. Empty roads, empty houses, and thousands fleeing to safer areas. Now, why is this happening? Because Russia is relentlessly pounding multiple areas, not just military facilities, but Ukrainians say even schools and civilian areas are not being spared. While they have complained to the United Nations and have sought an international inquiry, the ground realities are extremely painful, as our next report shows you.
It's day 9 of Russia's invasion on Ukraine. Ukraine's major cities continue to be pounded and shelled, most of them now resembling ghost towns with just smoke and fire left around. Lakhs of people have fled Ukraine as explosions and gunfire continue to rock major cities, including Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Heavy explosions are being heard as close to 20 kilometers from Kyiv's city center. Thousands are thought to be dead or injured. Those left behind have stayed to fight for their country, most parts of which are now left in ruins. Despite the intense pushback, Ukrainian cities of Borodyanka and Donetsk are completely bombed out. Videos have emerged showing charred buildings, fire burning on the streets, destroyed Russian military vehicles, and stray civilians desperately trying to find their way out of this horror. This aerial view of Borodyanka, a town 40 miles away from capital Kyiv, shows how Russian troops have attacked civilian infrastructure. What remains are scorched residential buildings, debris scattered all around, burnt down trucks, and smoke coming out of buildings along the main streets. One of the residential buildings was seen torn apart as fire still smolders inside. Some brave civilians tried to stop the movement of Russian troops and tanks by putting up sandbags and hedgehogs. A chilling video from the city of Chernihiv shows the aftermath of Russian strikes as an apartment building was bombarded, leaving at least 33 people dead and 18 wounded. The images coming from separatist region of Donetsk were as disturbing. Residential areas, public spaces, all reduced to rubble. Some women and children left behind were seen taking shelter in bunkers, while Russian troops were seen on the streets of Donetsk. Russian fighter jets have also destroyed a combined heat and power station in Oktyrka during an aerial bombardment. Russia claims to have so far destroyed 1,612 Ukrainian military infrastructure units. As Russian forces inch closer to the capital city of Kyiv, this invasion by land, air and sea is seen as the biggest attack on a European state since World War II. Bureau Report, India Today.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has now once again threatened not just Ukraine but the West, saying Russia has nuclear weapons. This is neither the first nor the last threat that's come from Russia. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has repeatedly issued the end threat, but this time it comes from the boss man of Russia. He said Ukraine should beware, Russia has nuclear weapons. Now, what's the implication of this? And is this meant only for Ukraine, or is there a wider message? Is this a wider message to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO countries, not to interfere in Russia's war with Ukraine? What nuclear weapons does Russia have? India Today's executive editor Shiv Arur tells us more about the Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles, the air, sea and land-launched nuclear weapons that Russia has in its arsenal.
Russia, during this crisis, has made not one, not two, but 3 nuclear threats. They've even operationalized and put on high alert their nuclear arsenal. Here's a look at the number of nuclear warheads that each country is known to have just now, because it's all about the numbers. Russia is the country with the largest nuclear arsenal, with over 6,200 nuclear warheads at this point of time. The United States has just a few, somewhat fewer warheads, no less powerful, at 5,550. And then there's China, which has 350 nuclear weapons at this time. For comparison, the only other two NATO countries in Europe that have nuclear weapons are, of course, France, which has 290. You've got UK, which has 225. Pakistan has 164. Remember, in the nuclear world, these numbers are enough to destroy the world many times over. India has 156 nuclear weapons. Israel has about 90. North Korea, we think, has between 40 and 50 nuclear weapons. You know, Russia's President Putin has put his nuclear deterrent forces on high alert, or regime of special duty as it's called, which is being seen as signaling, muscle flexing and posturing, but it has also raised the bogey of nuclear war, because that's the rhetoric. Useful to know what these nuclear delivery systems are that Russia currently has. Chief among the land-based nuclear delivery systems is the Topol-M. It's an intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of about 11,000 kilometers. Easy to hit any country, from launched anywhere in Russia. The Bulava is a submarine-launched ballistic missile with a range of about 8,000 kilometers. Pretty old system. It has been modernized, also very operational. And then finally is the Kinjal, which is a very high-speed air-launched cruise missile, nuclear-capable, which has a range of about 3,000 kilometers. So 3 weapons. There are many other delivery systems, but these are the main delivery systems in Russia's nuclear arsenal. A weapon that is already believed to have been used by Russian forces in various attacks in Ukraine already is the TOS-1. That's the weapon you see on your screen. The rockets are basically thermobaric rockets. It's a weapon system that's mounted, as you can see, on a T-72 tank chassis. The rate of fire is pretty high, 15 rounds in 30 seconds, and it has a range of anywhere between 300 and 3,500 meters. The rockets that it launches are vacuum bombs, basically thermobaric, which use environmental oxygen to generate a high-intensity explosion. So vacuum bombs also already being used in the crisis. And a Russian cruise missile, which is believed to have been used quite a lot in the crisis so far in Ukraine, is called the 3M54 caliber cruise missile. It has a length of between 6 and 9 meters. It has a weight of between 1,300 and 2,300 kilograms. Very, very capable weapon with multi-platform utility, explosive 400 to 500 kilogram warhead, and a formidable range of anywhere between 220 and 4,500 kilometers. Many of the cruise missile attacks on the city of Kharkiv, outside Kyiv and other places are believed to have been use of caliber cruise missile.
Russian missiles, rockets and artillery targeted a nuclear power plant at Zaporozhye en route Kyiv. Now, there was alarm across the world, from the International Atomic Energy Agency to the US President Joe Biden. They've expressed their distress, shock and displeasure at the nuclear power plant being targeted. Of course, the 6 nuclear reactors at Zaporozhye are safe. An administrative building caught fire, but that fire was brought under control. But the ramifications are extremely scary. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said had a power plant been stuck, had the nuclear reactors been struck, the disaster would have been at least 10 times worse than Chernobyl in 1986. We bring you this report.
The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine is the second biggest in Europe, housing 6 of the country's 15 reactors. The plant at full capacity accounts for 20% of Ukraine's electricity requirements. With Zaporizhzhia being hit, the natural fear of nuclear disaster looms large over this war with Russia. And already there are reports of radiation levels spiking at Chernobyl, as well as missiles hitting radioactive waste disposal sites in Ukraine. In a letter dated March 1, Russia, as per protocol, informed the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, that its military forces have taken control of the territory around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. On 4th of March, Ukraine announced that one of the reactors at the plant had taken a direct hit, setting off the fires. The official confirmed that the particular reactor was under renovation and not operational, but that there is nuclear fuel inside. And naturally, all around the world, there is dread of what could happen. Nuclear reactors are built to withstand even an aircraft crashing into them, but they need constant supervision and maintenance by trained staff. The danger of Ukrainian nuclear power plant going out of control during this war would depend on the gap in time from when the Ukrainian operators flee to when the Russian nuclear operators take over. Nuclear reactors are especially vulnerable in the event of an electricity failure during war. If a plant's power supply gets cut, this impacts reactor cooling and the cooling of spent fuel storage that is contained within relatively light walls. This could lead to a Fukushima-like meltdown and massive release of radioactive material.
Under normal circumstances, the likelihood of a reactor losing power and of the emergency diesel generators being damaged and of not being able to repair that equipment quickly is very, very small. But in a war, all of these different failures that would have to happen for a reactor to become damaged and melt down, the likelihood of all of those happening becomes much more likely than it does in peacetime.
Zaporizhzhia is vulnerable because some of the reactors were built and designed half a century ago and may well be past the original 40-year lifespan. These make the old reactors doubly susceptible to war damage. In case of a direct missile hit on structures built for spent fuel containment, it could destroy the structures, leading to massive levels of radioactivity that could spread all over the place depending on which way the wind blows. Russia understands this, as the Russian border is not very far away to the east. At the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, water from the Dnieper River is used to cool the reactors. If the dams and reservoirs upstream get damaged due to the war impacting the supply of water, the nuclear fuel could begin to overheat and evaporate to a point where the fuel metal cladding could ignite and release most of the radioactive material into the atmosphere.
As long as there is backup power and the fuel doesn't melt, the water can remain cool and the plant is safe. So the real critical question is whether there is still a continued supply of electricity to run the cooling pumps so that the fuel remains intact. If so, then the plant can be safe indefinitely as long as the power remains there, but that's a big if in a war zone.
Ukraine has 15 operational nuclear reactors, of which 9 were running when the Russian forces invaded the country. This is the first time in history that a war of this magnitude is raging in the close proximity of so much radioactive nuclear material, including thousands of tons of highly radioactive spent fuel. The threat of nuclear disaster hangs not just over Ukraine, but the entire landmass of Europe and beyond. And that includes large swathes of Russia as well. "130 kilometers north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, lies Chernobyl, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster ever. A faulty reactor led to an explosion in 1986 in what was then the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine, an integral part of USSR. 36 years later, Russia is back in control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant.
На жаль, вимушений повідомити, що станом на зараз
Sadly, I have to inform you that as of now, the Chernobyl zone, the so-called Chernobyl exclusion zone, and all the structures of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant are under the control of Russian armed groups.
жертв та постраждалих за даними
According to reports from Ukraine, Russian special forces occupied the entire Chernobyl area that includes a 32-kilometer radius exclusion zone around the plant that is stuck in a time wrap, having been devoid of human life for 36 years since the explosion in 1986. Chernobyl, to the north of Ukraine, sits right at the border with neighboring Belarus. The Chernobyl radioactive zone is spread across both Ukraine and Belarus. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant had been completely decommissioned, and with no human habitation in its vicinity, it has largely been a spot of controlled tourist interest. An international team has been working at Chernobyl, collaborating on the construction of a 32,000-ton dome around the radioactive reactor. 30 years ago, when Ukraine declared its independence, it had the third biggest pile of nuclear weaponry in the world. That was its share of the nuclear arsenal of the Soviet Union. Only USA and Russia had more. But in 1994, Ukraine had willingly given up its entire stockpile for the sake of peace. Both US and Russia stood guarantors to Ukraine's peace, signaling that Ukraine will never be in need of such weapons. In 2014, Putin went back on the promise that Russia had made and ordered the annexation of Crimea. Nuclear power plants house dangerous radioactive material. Even after years of cooling, spent fuel can release fatal doses of radiation in a very short span of time. And depending on weather conditions and which way the wind is blowing, a nuclear mishap is capable of spreading disaster in a radius hundreds of kilometers wide from where the actual power plant is.
Time for us to slip into a quick break, but don't go anywhere. On the other side of these messages, we will tell you about Russia systematically targeting airfields and air bases here in Ukraine and the destruction of the AN-225. Why is this a great loss, not just for Ukraine, but for the aviation industry globally? Stay with us on this special broadcast from strife-torn Kyiv in Ukraine on this India Today special broadcast.